I'd like to welcome today Ron Friedman. He's an award-winning social psychologist and best-selling author of The Best Place to Work and Superteams. His research is building high-performing teams and has been featured in the New York Times, Bloomberg, and Harvard Business Review. He's the founder of Superteams Inc, where he delivers keynotes, workshops, and executive advisory to senior leaders around the world. Ron, welcome to the Made Leader podcast.
Thanks, Jen. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm going to start off with a lie, okay? What is the biggest lie we tell leaders about building high-performing teams?
I think a giant misconception is that more collaboration is always better. And I think a lot of times organizations say they want more collaboration, but what they get instead is constant togetherness. And a key part of collaboration is making opportunities for individual solo work. So we often get our best ideas when we're working alone, not necessarily together in groups. And when we cannibalize those opportunities for solo work, what ends up happening is that work bleeds over into the evenings and weekends and contributes to burnout. And so what I want all leaders to appreciate is that if you want to get the best out of your team, you need to protect focus work just as seriously as you do collaborative time.
Yes, and that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you, because it does make you think, when you think collaboration, everyone's got to be together all the time. And we know how distracting that can be. So having that focus time is critical. I like that one.
Going to add to that, one of the findings that we came across while doing the research for Superteams is that the average worker loses 18 hours a week to meetings. They then lose another 11 hours a week in just digging themselves out of messages. And so that's 3/4 of their work week gone before they've achieved a single task. And so a lot of times we ask, why are workers getting burnt out? That's kind of been the unifying question of the last decade. Why are workers getting burnt out? A better question is, how do they manage to get any work done in the first place when 3/4 of their week is gone before they've even started?
Oh, yes, the meeting drain. I mean, we could talk about meetings. Actually, I have a few podcasts just about meetings because they are such a problem in organizations. And, I want to back up a little bit and talk about how you did your research. So you and your team compared average teams to high performing, or as you call them, super teams, which I love. But you found that fewer than 1 in 10 qualifies as a super team. So if anyone's listening, if they're feeling bad that their team's not a super team, it doesn't sound like it's the norm.
Absolutely. 8% is around the number that we tend to find. So here's how we did the research is we surveyed thousands of workers across a wide range of industries, and we asked them 2 simple questions about their teams. One is, how effective on a scale of 1 to 10 is your team at achieving its goals? And secondly, compared to other teams in your industry, how would you rate your team's performance? And then we took the teams with a perfect score, a very tiny group, we called them super teams, and we looked to see what do the super teams do differently, and 3 key strengths popped up. The first strength is super teams get more done by better managing their time, energy, and attention. The second is they don't just collaborate well, they actively make one another better. And the third is, even when things are going really well, they're not satisfied. They're constantly building new skills and improving over time. And the message that I hope people take away when they read Superteams is that all of these strengths are learnable, which means by building the right habits, and there are very specific habits that these teams are using that can be applied to any team. By building the right habit, any team can dramatically improve its performance.
Yes, I want to dive into each of those, but I want to ask you about this, okay? You talked about, even like when you're even starting, what qualifies as a team so they can become a super team, right? And you talked about a shared goal, role clarity, and interdependence. So I work with teams all the time, and you work with organizations all the time that just throw teams together, right? And they don't necessarily have that sense of interdependence. So can that be changed so that they even have a chance at becoming a super team?
Yes. So let me take a step back and define each of those in turn. So a lot of times people call themselves a team. We're all part of a team, either at home or in a sports group or at work, or many times at work, people belong to multiple teams. But just because people belong to the same group, that doesn't mean they're a team. So how do you turn a group of strangers into a team? Well, what the research suggests is that there are 3 components. The first is a shared goal. You need to be all trying to achieve the same goal together. A lot of times within organizations, people have different goals, especially even within the same team. So I might, for example, be interested in gaining a promotion. You might be interested in getting home at 5 o'clock. Somebody else might be interested in just doing as little as possible and not getting fired. Those are different goals. So what you need is to have everybody pushing in the same direction. And we can talk about how to create that next. Secondly is you need to have role clarity. I need to know what I'm responsible for and what you're responsible for, and how those two combine to help us achieve our shared goal. A lot of times people don't have that role clarity, and that leads either to turf wars where I want to claim something as my territory, you want to claim it as your territory, or balls get dropped because neither one of us thinks we're responsible. The third thing you need is interdependence, which is a psychological term that simply means we feel like we need each other to be successful. So if we're both salespeople and we have our own independent quotas, there's no reason for us to have any kind of interdependence, because my success doesn't rely on you and your success doesn't rely on me. And so in order for people to have that team mentality, you need to have those three things. Now, those three things are just table stakes. We're not even talking about creating a great team. We're just talking about why so many teams are dysfunctional is they are missing one or more of those components. So you asked, how do we create that sense of teamwork? First thing I think a lot of leaders need to address. Now, this is at the senior level. This is not at the manager level. At the senior level, it comes down to compensation. So if we are evaluating people on their individual performance and not their team performance, we should not be surprised that people don't care how their team is performing. I mean,
Yes.
it sounds very basic, but it's obvious, right? It's true. But in terms on the manager level, one of the things I think the best managers will do very well is they'll be very mindful of prioritizing the team ahead of the individual. Meaning, if you do a really good job and I'm your manager, when you do a really good job, I'm going to recognize you for your incredible performance, but I'm not going to just reward you personally by giving you a bonus or a weekend off. I'm going to reward the entire team. I'm going to take everybody out for drinks. I'm going to buy pizzas for everyone in your honor. And what that does is it recognizes you, but it sends a message that on this team, when one of us succeeds, all of us succeed.
Yeah, I love that thought. When I was back in corporate, they had a big, like a money that would go out, bonuses. And it was for a long time, it was all individual. And then they created a team bonus, as everyone had to share the money or whatever. But I think it lasted a year or two, and I think they went back to individual, but it was a nice try.
Well,
But I do love what you're saying, because so many leaders do want to show, here's the shining example on our team. And so they'll raise one person up.
yeah.
So I love that.
In fairness, I will just say
Mhm.
it's not one or the other. It needs to be a blend of the two, because what ends up happening is if you just reward the team, you end up having freeloaders. You have the people who aren't contributing, or the star performers get frustrated because they feel like they're pulling everyone up and other people aren't carrying their weight. And so it needs to be a blend where you reward high performers for high performance, but you don't blind them to the impact they're having on other people. So there needs to be some shared element, even if it's just 30% or 20%. Like there needs to be some component of I need to care about how the team is doing. And the ultimate example of this is profit sharing organizations. Profit sharing organizations tend to be way more productive and profitable, but they also tend to have more high performing teams. And part of the reason for that is because they hold each other accountable. So if you and I are colleagues on a profit sharing organization and you're not carrying your weight, we don't have to wait for the manager to come in and tell you to do a good job, because I'm going to do it. And so is everyone else around you, because we all care about the final product.
Yes. Yes. I love that example. I want to go back to what you talked about, the shared goal. So use the example of, okay, I want a promotion and not you. If you want to make sure you're not doing any extra work. So when I thought of that example, I was thinking, okay, that's a personal goal. So when you're talking about a shared goal, does that mean like a business goal versus what people personally want to accomplish?
I think it's the leader's job to figure out what the shared goal is going to be for the group, and then identify some metrics to create around that. And the key, I think, here is that most people assume, okay, well, we all are in the marketing division, therefore we're a team. Not necessarily, but unless there's a shared goal that is something that we both are striving for, there's no reason for us to feel like a team. And I mentioned having metrics. Metrics are important because they really sharpen our focus around an outcome. And that metric can be as simple as we're going to, for example, going to have a certain retention rate of clients as a team, or we're going to have a certain customer service ranking as a team. And I can't do that alone, and you can't do that alone, but we can do it together, and then we're incentivized in some capacity to achieve that. So that can mean, we get a bonus, or it could be something like we get a party at the end of the year, but it needs to be something that we are genuinely committed towards achieving. And it's up to the manager to figure out what that is.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the things I'm mulling over with one of the teams I'm working with. They don't have a shared goal, and trying to get them all on the same page because they don't quite have the interdependence. They're not quite in super team territory right now, so we're looking at just trying to get some of the basics. But I want to go back to the get more done, what you found in your research, and the collaborative time versus the focus time. So tell us a little bit more about the focus time, because there's one thing that did surprise me in there about how super teams do take their vacations. They take them frequently. It's not like they're just sitting there working themselves to death, right? And so the rest and recovery was important along with the focus time. So can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So just to refresh everyone's memory, there are 3 key strengths that differentiate super teams from average teams. The first one is they get more done by better managing their time, energy, and attention. How do they do it? 4 chapters in the book, so I'm going to try to do my best to cover most of it. But to begin, they don't make meetings the default. They make meetings a last resort. They're 50% better at avoiding unnecessary meetings. They're 54% less likely to schedule recurring meetings, which often become a time sink because it's so difficult to extricate yourself from over time. People have a recurring meeting on their calendar. They prefer to avoid having the difficult conversation of saying, Jen, I don't feel like our Thursday afternoons are a good use of my time anymore. That's an uncomfortable conversation. They would rather just have that meeting that it feels like a time drain. The other thing they do is they don't just play defense by eliminating unnecessary meetings. They also play offense by carving out time for focus work during the day. This is the major challenge. Is we all have all these assignments that we have to do. But when 3/4 of our week disappears into meetings and messages, we have a really tough time getting that work done. So we come in early, we stay late, we work weekends, and then we get burnt out. So super teams will carve out focus time during the week where people can, for 90 minutes, for example, turn off their email and just do their work, not have to be responsible to answer messages. The other thing they do is meeting free days. They'll take out a day a week or half a day a week, and they say this is off limits to meetings. And what that enables people to do, again, is to focus without interruption. They don't call them meeting free days, though. They call them get things done days because they want to reinforce the purpose behind the initiative. So creating time for people to actually do solo focus work during the day, it's a revelation. And one of the things that I say it's a revelation because most companies just do not do this. Most teams do not do this. And it's burning people out. And one of the real insights in the book that was surprised us when we did this research is that a lot of the hacks that people talk about, the productivity tips that people urge people who want to be top performers to adopt, things like turn off your email, batch it, only look at it at 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, or turn off your notifications. These productivity hacks do not work. And the reason they do not work is when you're working on a team, people are reliant on you. If you independently disappear, if you unilaterally decide you're not going to be online from 10 a.m. until 12 p.m., you're creating bottlenecks for your teammates. And that is not sustainable as a team. And so we really have to think for holistic team-based solutions that enable people to do their jobs. Like these productivity tips are well-intentioned. People are just trying to do their jobs. It's all they're trying to do is just do a good job. They can't because they're constantly being sucked into meetings and messages. But when people take it into their own hands, they actually make the work longer and harder for everyone.
All right, so let me dive into that. Let's just make it really tactical. So everyone has to agree on the time, right? So if everyone, I love the idea because the messages are such a time suck, especially the little IMs that you get, the little Teams messages and everything. Everyone has to come to some kind of consensus on what time's good.
Yeah, I think, if we want to talk tactically, first thing I would say is this is something that the team should experiment with. It does not have to be a one-time decision that we're going to have meeting-free days on Mondays and Tuesdays, and we're going to have focus blocks from 12 p.m. until 5 p.m. on Mondays. I would argue that's probably not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because you're going to find that you're bumping up against all kinds of issues. Like, for example, there's an emergency that comes up on Tuesday, but nobody can meet. Now our hands are tied until Wednesday. I recommend adopting one thing at a time as an experiment and then talking about it, saying, hey, what worked, what didn't work, and then figuring out what are you going to try next and decide on this as a team, because this is how super teams improve. They're constantly running experiments. That's one of the things that we'll talk about later. They're constantly running. This can be the experiment is Let's try to integrate this into our work week and then reflect. Did it work? Did it not work? How can we improve it? And if you just get a little bit better every week, eventually you're going to approach super team territory.
Yes, I love it. And I was starting with smaller time blocks. I think that's it. Getting things done days. I've got a client who they have meeting free days. I'm going to recommend that they reframe that, right? Because it can be, if you have a meeting free day, it can be like, whew, it's a chance to breathe, which is fine too. Sometimes you need those recovery days to come up with your creative ideas, but renaming it makes it focused.
I got to tell you, it's not going to be a recovery day. I actually feel like it'll be recovery from stress. There's research showing that when you take a meeting free day, your stress is cut in half. That's remarkable, but also productivity shoots up 71%. So it's not like people are just like Netflix and chilling. They're actually getting the thing that they need to get done. Well, if you're a top performer, I'm sure you're someone who has experimented with working on Sunday mornings. And the amount of work you can get done on Sunday mornings when there's no one around and nobody emailing you, in just 2 hours, you can feel like you've done more than a day's work. What if we allowed everybody to do that for 1 day a week? Just try it. See what happens. Worst case scenario, you don't do it again. By the way, I want to circle back to something else you asked. I want to make sure I'm addressing it. You asked about recovery time. So if you look at the top performing athletes, they take their recovery just as seriously as they take their game day performance. And they're really, really regimented about it. So in our work, what we found is that actually, super teams don't necessarily take more time off, but what they do with their time off is different. They tend to spend it doing more active things like hobbies, mastering new skills. A lot of people think that when they're not working, they're automatically recovering. That turns out to be true. Like if you go on Netflix or if you scroll Instagram, that can help you unwind at the end of the day. It's not going to restore your energy. What will restore your energy is learning a new skill or trying something that is a challenge and overcoming new challenges. So that can mean learning a new song on the piano, or it can mean trying out a new dish. It can mean playing pickleball. Those types of activities really restore our energy way more than passive activities.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm going camping this weekend for the first time, and I'll let you know if that is actually helping me when I get back. I'm learning something new. All right. So making each other better. You talked about this earlier. Oftentimes there's this dynamic within a team where the leader's always going to be the person keeping people accountable. And that's not the same on super teams, which I really enjoy because that's what I try to tell you. It's a peer-based accountability that you talk about. Can you dive into that?
Yeah. In our research, we asked people a simple question. We said, when things go wrong on your team, who do you feel worse about letting down? Do you feel worse about letting down your manager, or do you feel worse about letting down your teammates? On super teams, it wasn't even close. 82% said, I feel worse about letting down my teammate. And, it reminds me of a quote from the coach of the Minnesota Golden Gophers. It's a college football team. PJ Fleck is the name of the coach. And he's got a quote that says, on bad teams, nobody leads. On average teams, the manager leads. But on great teams, it's the players who lead. And that's exactly that exact same insight is what you see on super teams. People work much harder when they feel like they're accountable to their teammates. They take ownership and they try to make the people around them better. And so that accountability piece is crucial because what happens is you basically multiply the manager effect. If you're surrounded by people who are holding you accountable, you're going to try way harder. And the other thing they do is they raise the bar for performance. And so when you're surrounded by people who do good work, there's that sense of reciprocity. You want to do your part. You don't want to fall behind the group. You want to keep up. It's just about how on the best teams, just being around smart, ambitious people makes you smart, ambitious by default.
Gotcha. And I know there's some strategies in the book, but is it the leader standing back a little bit and not necessarily always jumping in? Is it letting peers have a chance to keep each other accountable?
That could be part of it. The other part of it is when leaders do something that is clearly beneath their pay grade because it benefits the team, that sends a louder signal than anything that on this team, we do whatever it takes to get results, even if it's not part of our job description. One of the statements you often hear on super teams is, would it be helpful if I took the lead on this? Very rarely do you hear that on average teams. On super teams, you'll hear it often. And, a lot of times you'll have somebody who does this naturally. Usually it's someone who comes from a sports background, but more often than not, people need to see it from their leader before they do it themselves.
So that question you just posed, that would be the leader asking that question.
No, it would be the
peers.
teammate. Yeah. And I've been on teams where you had people volunteer to take things off other people's plates. And that's a very different way of thinking about work. A lot of times people think, being a good teammate is just keep my head down and doing my job. But there's a difference between a good teammate and a great teammate. A good teammate will just do their job. A great teammate will do their job and make other people better at their job.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. There were a lot of stats in here, so I may get this wrong. But one of the things that I think I remember is that when people had downtime,
Mhm.
they actually went and actively sought out, hey, do you need any help with their
Yes.
teammates
They were
rather than just coasting?
exactly right. They were twice as likely to do that. So we asked people, if you had free time at work, which would you be more likely to do? And the choices were things that ranged from I'd ask the boss for more work, or I'd go to a teammate and say, hey, do you need help with anything? Or would you attend to like a personal chore that you had on your list? Or would you go home early? And on super teams, people were more than twice as likely to say, I'd go to a teammate or I'd go to the boss. I'd ask the team what they need from me right now. And, I want to be realistic. In some jobs, that's not possible because you're so overloaded. So the idea of even having free time feels like a fantasy. So the idea of like, hey, here's some guy on the internet telling you go and ask your teammate for more work. I am not suggesting that. But if you are in the mindset of, I just have so much to do, there's no way I could possibly ask a teammate if they need any help right now, I'm here to tell you that I think that is more likely the fault of the way your team is structured than how you're spending your time. And I think more leaders need to take responsibility for this, because this is why, people often ask me like, what's the best way of starting to implement this if you're a leader? I say the biggest skill that leaders are lacking is something I call focus amplification. And it's the skill of freeing up your team's time, energy, and attention. And I think of it as the first domino, because once leaders master this skill of replacing the barrage of meetings and messages with opportunities for actual focus work, everything gets easier. People now suddenly have freed up to help out their teammates, to try new things, to build skills at work. But it really is a skill that leaders have just not been taught.
No, not at all. I think that's a really great suggestion because what I see is, especially with early leaders, their teams are overloaded. And so they either won't push back and say, hey, where does this fall in the priority to their boss? Or they'll just take it on, right? Neither of them is helpful. It's like looking through that priority list and saying, okay, what can I knock out? What can I take off to free them up to still do their work? But you're kind of removing those roadblocks. I
Yeah,
love that.
I think that part of being a good leader is putting your people in a position to do great things. And if they're constantly overwhelmed, then you've either hired the wrong person or there's something wrong with the way that you're structuring the assignments. But either way,
Yes.
you should take accountability for it. You should take accountability for everything you can take accountability for. If you're pointing the fingers at others, generally that's not going to result in a positive outcome.
No, you always go point the finger at yourself just first.
Yep.
But, all right. So continuing on the make each other better, this is one I had to ask. It's about trust. So
Mhm.
many of the teams I work with, they lack trust. And you talked about that as a crucial feature of high performing teams. Really loved the Guns N' Roses example. That was a brilliant story to put in there. So
Thank
listeners will
you.
have to go read it themselves. But let's talk about the importance of trust on high performing teams.
Yeah, if you don't trust your teammates or you don't trust your boss, having a high performing team is impossible. And so within the book, what I talk about is how trust is built within work situations. So what it comes down to is three factors. I call them the three pillars of trust. They come down to three things: caring, competence, and consistency. Three C's. So caring. If people don't feel like you care about them, they're not going to trust you. Competence. If people don't feel like you can do a good job, they're not going to trust you. And finally, consistency is you can have both those things, caring and competence. But if you're inconsistent in how competent you are, or you disappear for hours at a time, or sometimes you are selfish, but most of the times you care about them, that inconsistency is going to cost you and you're not going to have trust. So you need to build all three. And I think that's really instructive for when you think about when trust breaks down in a relationship. Because if you don't trust someone, I'm pretty sure reflecting on those three pillars, you will very quickly identify what it is that you don't trust about them.
Yes, yes, these are great because the inconsistency I've seen a lot, and I think too, it's when I think about new leaders, they're struggling to figure out how does it mean to show I care, right? Because sometimes they get so focused on the goals. I was one of those when I was an early leader. you forget about the people. So just knowing that caring is a big piece of it. I think
And
it's important
caring, yeah, and caring, by the way, simply means listening to what their goals are and helping them achieve their goals, even if they're not related to work. That's a key part of showing that you care about someone. And so if someone really prioritizes their family and you know that their son has a soccer game over the weekend, taking something off their plate so that they can really be present, like that's not something you're going to always be able to do, but it goes a long way towards establishing trust. And so trust doesn't just live between the hours of 9 to 5. You really need to get to know the person that you're working with, having actual genuine curiosity and working to help them achieve their goals, whatever they are, even if they're outside of what the team needs.
Yes, knowing those goals, critical.
Mhm.
To ask them their goals, right? So improving over time, that continuously getting better as a team, and you found that super teams excel at giving feedback. I want you to talk a little bit about that, but I've got a very specific question. But if you could just tee up what you found in the
Sure.
feedback realm.
Yes. I can predict what question you're going to ask me, but I will.
Oh, I'm curious. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. We'll get to it next. So
Mhm.
what we found about feedback, super teams benefit from having way more feedback than average teams. Now, in average teams, most of the feedback comes top down. It's the manager who gives the employee feedback. On super teams, it's not just top down. They're getting more feedback from their manager, but it's also peer to peer. There's way more peer to peer feedback happening. And it's not because teammates are constantly giving each other pointers. It's because people are voluntarily and proactively going to their colleague and saying, hey, what do you think of this? How can I improve this? And then they're making changes before the work ever gets to the manager or to the client. And so there's just a wealth more feedback happening, and people are integrating it into their work in real time. And that's a key component to how they get better.
Yeah, I mean that was one that really resonated with me with one of the teams I'm working, that they always go to the manager. So how could they leverage those peers to make the programs that they
Well,
develop
part of it
better?
is the manager needs to socialize this. So when someone presents a project to the manager, they need to say, hey, before I look at this, did you show it to Madeline? Did you show it to Henry? Like you can get the idea in people's heads that it's expected for you to share this with your colleague first. And so part of it is modeling it by the leader.
Oh, that's an important tip. Okay, so this is my specific question.
Yes. I'll let you know if I
You,
thought of
all
it.
right. I want you to talk about future focused feedback,
Okay.
because that was brilliant. And I think this is something I like when I teach feedback that I hadn't considered. So
Oh, good. I'm glad
was
you
that
like
was
that.
that the question? What
Well, I thought
that
you were
you
going to attack me on this because I have been
no.
I have received criticism from this from a different podcast. So I'll tell you about what he said and then why I
Okay.
responded. So your question was, why should feedback be future focused? Now, here's what that means is if Jen, we have a terrible interview here,
Don't say
fortunately,
that.
God forbid, we're not having one, but I might say to you, Jen, the next time we have an interview, please, can you send me your questions in advance so that I can have richer, fuller answers? That would be future focused feedback. That's not how feedback is usually delivered. Usually feedback is delivered. Jen, of course I screwed that up. I didn't have the questions. I didn't know what you were going to ask me. So how could I possibly do that well? So what that does is it puts the blame on your lap. Now you're more likely to be defensive because I've blamed you for something. So you feel like you need to defend yourself. You need to protect yourself. You don't want your reputation being smeared. So future focused feedback is much more effective. And it's something that we find in the research that tends to be much better received from recipients. So the question was, what did that other podcast host say to me about this? He said, well, I really like to know what I did wrong. I don't want to just have future focused feedback. And I said to him, that's because you are a top performer. This is a former athlete. And people who have very high self-esteem really do prefer negative feedback to positive feedback because
Mhm.
they feel like negative feedback will help them improve in the future. Positive feedback is like, I can't really do anything with that. All I can do is keep doing the same thing over and over again. But negative feedback holds clues about how I can improve in the future. And what I explained to him is that the average person does not have high self-esteem. Like most people do not want to hear what they did wrong. They just want to know how to improve. And so I think if you're dealing with most people, future focused feedback will be far more effective. And I think, yes, it's true that high performers really enjoy giving negative feedback. That's not going to be very effective for most people.
I don't know. I took it in the same way, right? Like, so I took it, it would have gone the same either way for me. It's still the same piece of information I'm taking away. So I still got it and I still knew what you were trying to say. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It didn't feel like an attack. It was like, okay, cool. I need to
exactly. I've gotten you the
lighten
same
that up a little.
information. I've gotten you the same information without feeling like an attack. That's huge.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to call that out because I think that is something that leaders can take and say, hey, can you consider this for the
Hmm.
future? There was a finding that you had, and it floored me because it was the 3 factors that make work meaningful.
Mm.
And you found differences between average and super teams because there is such, people talk about your purpose and invested, and you have to really believe in the mission, right? Talk about that.
Yeah, so we asked people, how meaningful is your job? And on average teams, it was much lower than on super teams. That's not surprising. When you're part of a great team, people feel like they're getting more done. Their teammates support them. They're improving over time. Of course, they're going to feel like their work is more meaningful. But then we asked them, what makes your work meaningful? And the top answer on average teams was earning a salary to support my family. And that's a very reasonable thing to be proud of, right? Like there's it's an evolutionarily wired survival mechanism. We want to support our people around us. We want to lift them up. That's great. But on super teams, it was different. Salary wasn't even in the top 3. The number one answer was feeling like I'm part of a team. And that speaks to how much more meaningful work can become where the team itself becomes the source of meaning for people. And I would just ask listeners to think about, like, when was the last time you felt like you were part of a team where just doing the work itself was the source of the meaning, as opposed to doing something as a means to an end? And there's a fundamental difference between those two experiences. One is intrinsic motivation, where we enjoy the task because the task is enjoyable. The other is extrinsic motivation, which is doing something in order to earn an outcome or a reward. And anytime you're engaged with an intrinsic motivation, whether it be playing a video game or just cooking a meal for a family because you want everyone to enjoy the food, that is a much more healthy, enjoyable experience. And you can see why on super teams, people just get so much more out of their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that's working for myself. I miss being on a team. It's one of the things that I look back on, and it's like I really enjoyed working with a team. And people, you get caught into how much work sucks and it's so hard and we're burnt out, but you're like, there is a really wonderful social component in teams.
I agree. And it's not often that people experience that, unfortunately, but I've been on those teams where you feel like you look forward to seeing your colleagues on Monday morning, or you miss them on vacation. And I know that a lot of people listening to this feel like that's just so foreign, but I got to tell you, every time I talk to people who are on great teams and I ask them, if you were to leave today, what would you miss most about this organization? To a person, they always say the people.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not your answer, I'm telling you, there's a better job out there for you.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you on that. Looking forward to Mondays. I don't know about missing people on vacation when I'm away, but you found it.
Okay.
It's a bit too far for me, but other people. I apparently have not been on a super team. All right, Ron. So if you could mentor an early leader over coffee tomorrow, what would you get them to start doing to start building that super team?
I think that what we talked about earlier, which is learn about what people are trying to achieve. Where are they trying to go in their life? People are going to have very vastly different goals. Someone in their 50s is going to have a different goal than someone in their 20s. And listen to what interests them, where they want to be, and then look for ways to either give them projects or even tell them a story in terms of, like, when you present a project, about why it benefits them in their career. Because when people feel like you're really looking out for them, they work so much harder for you and feel just way more loyal to you. One of the findings in super teams is around moonlighting. So how managers approach when people want to take on a side gig, when they want to take on another assignment on their off hours. And a lot of managers hate it, right? They hate the idea of someone's attention being divided, or they feel like the loyalty is not really to the organization. But on super teams, they're far more likely to be supportive of people in their moonlighting ventures. And it's because they genuinely care about their employees and their growth. And one of the interesting findings that I also report in the book is how having those side gigs isn't necessarily bad for people's engagement at work. In fact, if the person is doing it because they want to master new skills and grow as a person, then having that side gig actually improves their engagement in their regular day job. And so supporting people in and outside of work is crucial for any manager at any level if you want to bring out the best in people.
Right. And we're not one dimension. We're multidimensional. You're bringing it to work too. So yes, your story is the DJ in there. So I'll just leave it at that. There's great stories peppered throughout. But your book, let's see, Superteams. This is the early copy. It's out June 2nd, correct?
That's right.
All right. Well, where can people find out more about you and connect?
Well, one of the things I tried to do in developing this book is I didn't want people to just read a great book. I really wanted to help them implement it. So we created a free masterclass. You can get it free with the book. It'll give you the best insights in under 20 minutes, and I'll give you a discussion guide to share some of these ideas with your teammates. You can just go to superteamsmasterclass.com, and you can find me at superteamsinc.com. That's the name of my company. We do keynotes and workshops and are always looking to partner with organizations and help improve their leadership offsites.
Yeah, so bring Ron in or get his book and do a book club with fellow leaders, all of that. But Ron, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure listeners know?
I'll give you one more tip just for fun. This was something we asked in our research was, there's a lot of leaders who want everybody in at the office all the time. They want everybody in at the office. And so we look to see, where are super teams more likely to be found? Are they more likely to be found in an office, working hybrid, or working remotely? And I think most people, if you had them guess, they would say hybrid. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Super teams are just as likely to form in any one of those situations. It's because how a team works is vastly more important than where a team works. And so just because everyone's in at the office all the time doesn't mean they're more productive. In fact, in many cases, they can be way more drained from the commute and way more frustrated because they were forced to come in. Whereas people at home, oftentimes they're isolated. People in hybrid, a lot of times you tend to have faltering relationships because people don't communicate quite as much as in person. So the reality is the location is secondary to how the team is structured and how the team works. And what I try to do in super teams is give people all the best insights on what the best teams do differently.
I love that, Ron. I was just talking to an HR person that they went 5 days a week in office and people are dying, right? So there is a myth that you have to be in the office, and sometimes you do, right? Sometimes it can work anywhere. So I really am glad you left us with that last tip. Ron, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jen.